I'm about to bring you some of the secrets of the mysterious East. Chain stitch. Who knows when somebody first thought of looping a thread through another to form a chain? Maybe it was in the mists before history. That means nobody knows when. But at any rate, they've been doing it in India for thousands of years, and they're still doing it today. You see, my dress is done in tiny chain stitches in silk, in lovely orange silk with touches of magenta on a deep purple wool material. And it was just recently done in India. And so were my shoes. They're green silk with black outlines on red Morocco leather. And here's a magnificent skirt. Stitch. You see, materials are so inexpensive in India and and labor is so terribly cheap that they simply used all sorts of scraps of red cloth, probably all colors, and threw them into the dye pot to make them the same red, laid them down, and then chain-stitched over the whole thing. When I looked very closely at this skirt, it was all patchwork with the raw edges covered up by the close stitching on the top. One of the really fascinating things about chain stitch, though, is its variety of texture. It's simply fascinating to see how a very fine chain stitch looks on a very old piece of red cloth. This is a traditional Indian piece which has been stitched onto a suede to form a handbag, in contrast with this other handbag which is in thick rug wool. And it's done with lines of chain stitch back and forth, making the circles of the flowers, and then the whole thing is kind of felted by being knitted very closely together, so it gives an overall very sharp, clear effect to the silhouettes. One of the fascinating things that really started the whole rage of crewel work, you know, in the 17th century, both in England and in America, were the Indian tree of life designs, and they were usually done in chain, very, very finely in silk. This one is a difference of an open effect and a different texture, and there are some little flowers over here with spots. The chain stitch has been worked around in little circles so that it fills in the area with a light open pattern. I thought a sampler of chain stitch like that might be rather fun for you to try, so I just sketched out on an open piece of cloth some of those leaves and flowers like the Indian designs. You can do chain stitch easily in your hand. If you want to, you can do it in a frame, but it's one of those few stitches that really is almost faster if you do it, sewing it in your hand. You go right back into the stitch that you just have taken, right inside the loop, put your thumb on the thread, and pull it tight. Really, you're wrapping that thread underneath the needle. I don't want to get sewn into my little bobbles here. But some people think that they mustn't go inside the loop, that they must go afraid if they pull, the whole thing will disappear if they go back into the same hole where they just came up. Well, of course, that would happen if you don't put your thumb on the loop and come up with the needle right inside it. If you do a few chain stitches and they seem to be a little uneven, you can pull a little tightly if you have rather a big stitch, and then you can leave a little stitch rather loose, and you'll find it comes out evenly. But the main thing is, as you sew away, you develop a rhythm, and you get a rather nice evenness anyway, quite naturally. Don't forget to go right down in the same hole that you came up and pull the loop flat so that it doesn't fly up in the air and get away from you. When you want to end off, go down outside the loop. That holds the last loop flat, and then you can fasten off on the wrong side with 2 or 3 stitches into the back of the last stitches you just made. When you take a new stitch, come up into that loop, right inside it, with your new thread, and go right back again into the same hole and continue on, and nobody will know where your join was, because it's continually looping the loop and making a chain. Chain stitch does have a direction to it. In other words, you can see whether the stitches were all worked in the same way. I started this leaf in light green here, went down to the end, to the tip, and then started the medium color next door to it at the base, and also the dark. So they all run from the bottom of the leaf to the tip. And that gives a smoother effect than over here, where I went round and round inside the leaves. I wanted this to look like a rough texture because it's all in one flat color, and I thought it would look more interesting if the stitches were worked round and round. Here it's just a single outline so that you have a nice contrast between the solid and the open fillings. You can do all sorts of things. You can put different colored veins inside the leaves. You can do crisscross lines across your shapes. Here I put some little crosses in chain stitch, and I meant originally to put a vein down the middle of that leaf, and then I changed my mind. But I drew the design with one of those watercolor pens, and if the background linen is washable, you can throw the whole thing into a tub of cold water and wash it just like a sweater. It won't come to any harm. But here is another version of chain stitch, and this is an Indian rug done in cashmere. The men work on these rugs exclusively. They sit in large rooms, each with a rug, cross-legged on the floor, making them in tiny, tiny chain stitches on heavy linen. This pattern must have been sent out from Europe because, or from here, it's rather a French design, like an Aubusson. But this rug is an original Indian pattern, a flowering garden of lovely blue and cream-colored flowers on a red ground, and a magnificent deep blue border to set the whole thing off. It's rather fun to look at the background, too. Both these rugs have different ways of filling in the shapes. I don't know if you can see over here, this is all worked around in little scroll designs. And the other one is just perfectly filled in just as you want to, working your way around. Well, I thought it would probably take you 1,000 years to do a very fine rug like that, but you could work quite a big, bold pattern, which would be really exciting, on a double thread of very heavy linen. I mean, 2 layers of very heavy linen. And the surprise about this is that the speediest way of doing it is to work it with a crochet hook. It takes a little bit of practice, but once you get going, you can do it so quickly, it's absolutely magnificent. You plunge the crochet hook down into the material and pull it sharply through, holding the thread at the back so that you can catch it up in a loop. Then you go through again and bring that loop up from the back. You have to work on an embroidery frame, of course. It has to be pulled very tightly. Stretch it so that the material won't have any give in it, because you want to pull sharply through so that you can catch that loop. It's something on the basis of a hooked rug, in a way. This rug that I'm making, I thought would be very nice to have a border of these flowers with a brown background, and then in the middle an interlacing pattern. You can join it too, because if you take several pieces of linen and work each of them with your chain stitching, you can join the linen and then it won't show when you stitch right over the joins. Now, I'd like to show you what happens on the wrong side so that you could see what I was doing underneath the frame. Here I am holding the thread, and the crochet hook's going to come through from the back. Now wrap it round the hook, wrap the thread round the hook and pull it. Dive through again, wrap it round the hook. The whole secret of it is the tension, the way you hold that thread as it goes round the hook. Pull it sharply through. I'm taking huge, enormous stitches, but it'll show you what I mean. Pull hard on the thread and back on the needle, and then you can hook each loop through the previous one. There's one other marvelous thing about this. If you don't like what you've done, if the direction seems wrong or the stitches seem a little large, watch what happens. Out it comes. It's really quite fascinating, because although it takes very little time to put in, it takes even less to take it out. I was going to work these flowers with red. That's the best way to start, by outlining your flowers first. Then fill in with a cream color, or a pale peach in this case, and then fill in your whole background whichever direction you'd like, in a dark brown to set off the glowing reds of the flowers. You see, the background could start here, and you go chain stitching around, and then you go up and around this flower and over here and over to the stem, and get smaller and smaller concentric curves as you go. Now, when you finish, you pull your thread up, as I showed you before, and take a needle and thread it and take it down through the loop and fasten it off. Well, the time has come, but you can see you can put it in and take it out as quickly as you want. So I do hope you have fun looping the loop. See you soon.